Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today for this really important topic on overcoming perfectionism as a therapist. My name is Chetan, and I'm going to be the moderator for the incredible panelists that we have today. Before we get started, I would love to just invite everyone to do a really quick grounding exercise so that we can mark the boundary for this time we have together and hopefully maybe get our mind a little bit more present, a little bit more grounded. So, if you don't mind, just kind of closing your eyes briefly, maybe wiggling your toes, wiggling your fingers, activating that mind-body connection, and take 3 deep breaths at your own pace. Lovely. Well, I'm really excited for this time that we have together and this really important topic. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I'm just going to briefly introduce myself and PAT as an organization. So my name is Chetan. I'm a general manager here at PATH. I oversee our operations in Georgia. And in addition, I'm involved with a lot of our efforts to build community amongst the incredible therapists that are in our network, because we know that being a full-time or even a part-time teletherapy sometimes incredibly isolating, and it's really through connection and through community that therapists do their best work. And I'm excited to offer events like this as part of our community, and excited to hear what our panelists have to say today. On the next slide, I just want to briefly cover what PATH is all about. So we are a national behavioral health company that powered by technology that makes it easy for people to find a therapist that's covered by their health insurance. We are deeply committed. I always like to draw attention to the second paragraph on the left there. We're deeply committed to providing high quality care that improves the lives of people we treat, but also that invests in the providers and the therapists in our network who deliver that care, because it really all starts with the therapist. On our next slide, we have our mission statement, where we talk about our mission really is to make mental health care work for everyone. And by everyone, we mean patients of all backgrounds and income levels. We mean our payer partners, our referral partners, including many healthcare systems, but most importantly, the therapists and providers in our network, which is why today's discussion is such an important topic. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. The question I'll ask you all is just if you could, in a minute or less, tell us a little bit about your background and what's relevant to today's topic. And also, if you'd like to share, how is perfectionism showing up for you, or how are perfectionistic tendencies showing up for you today? I'll start on that latter question. We were chatting a little bit before everyone came in. Me and my partner adopted our first rescue dog a couple weeks ago. He's in the background here. And I had this internal debate on whether I should crate him or not, in case he's just like roaming around in the background or barking during today's session. And I said, you know what? It's going to be fine. And if he barks, either A, Zoom might filter it out, or B, I'm sure people will understand. So Susan, would love to hear from you.
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. My name is Susan Zinn. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I'm a certified trauma and eating disorder specialist. I'm an author, and I have a private practice in Los Angeles. And I was also sharing, I just have my first foster dog. So I have 3 dogs here. One of them that's a medical foster right now. So I'm crossing my fingers and toes that there isn't a lot of scratching at the door, because he's having massive separation anxiety too. So, but it's been a wonderful experience and something that I think our community can all relate to, of how important animals are to our lives and It's been more, I've gotten more out of it than I've given. So I highly recommend if anyone ever wants to adopt or foster. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And Alana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Ilana Varro. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California and also a mastery method life coach working with a lot of women's issues, including eating disorders, anxiety, self-worth, identity, all the wonderful things that we go through in life. And how perfectionism is showing up for me today, this morning, is not being able to find the right link to join this webinar and feeling a little frazzled, and then realizing that it's absolutely perfect that for the topic of perfectionism, I am running late. So happy to be here and have this conversation.
Thank you.
And on
Alyssa?
to
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Leah Mancow. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist, a group practice owner, and I'm also trained in EMDR and CBT. And I do a bunch of other stuff outside of therapy, but therapy is my main work. The way perfectionism shows up for me, I think, is in comparison. Me comparing myself to others. I just saw on Netflix that there was this documentary out with Jonah Hill, and he is filming a therapy session with his psychiatrist. And I got to see a little bit of it, and I think it's really great. But then I'm watching his psychiatrist interventions, and his psychiatrist creates note cards for all his clients and breaks down these concepts into like small digestible things. And he creates them and just hands them off to his patients. And I thought to myself, I should be doing that. Why aren't I doing that? How come I don't know that concept? And I found myself kind of in this spiral of comparison. So that is an example of how it shows up for me in my own work.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Alyssa. I mean, and also you don't have the benefit of a TV production crew behind you to prep all that for you, you know? That's such a good example. And thank you everyone for sharing. I would love to invite anyone who's here live, just go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can say your name, where you're joining us from. And if you like to share, you're welcome to answer that question yourself of how perfectionism is showing up for you today. Also, we've teed up some really great topics, I think, for today, thanks to Susan, Alana, and Alyssa's experience. But we would love to make this session as interactive as possible. So there is a Q&A tab at the bottom here that I will be monitoring as we go. So if you have a question, just pop it in there. We also plan to end kind of our planned topics around 15 minutes before the end of the hour. So, we'll have some time for additional Q&A then. But so to kick it off, I just wanted to ask all of you, sometimes it feels like there's a lot of pressure on therapists to have a perfect life. Like, you're giving advice to people on emotional regulation, on family relationships. Surely, maybe you all have that all figured out and you're little Buddha masters. So do you feel like that is true at all? Have you felt that pressure at all at any point in your career, either from yourselves or from other people? And if so, how have you kind of dealt with it or evolved your stance towards that pressure in your own life? I would love each of you to answer this initial question. So whoever wants to pop in first.
I know oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Alana.
Go for it.
Okay. I know in my personal life, sometimes when I've struggled with something and with very close family members, when I would open up, the response would be like, well, you don't need to be sad. You're a therapist. You can therapize yourself, or you know what to do. And I've trained, or I've shown my family that that's not okay to say. That's not appropriate. So I've just kind of dealt with it right away. Like, I'm still a human being. I still go through things. But for me, I would get that response from them immediately. It kind of just very dismissive in the sense that like, well, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You know what to do. And so just letting people know that that's not the case.
Yeah, I definitely feel oftentimes a lot of projection or countertransference from clients working in the eating disorder field and body image, and a lot of focus on, how you look and how you present and how you feel in your body. And I've found it really helpful to be transparent about the process of recovery and how thoughts still come up around perfectionism, or maybe having a bad body image day, or, just because I'm in my recovery doesn't mean that I don't have bad days or my own insecurities. And so really breaking down, I think it's been really helpful in um, my therapy, because I like to share a little bit about my own personal journey instead of just being that like blank slate. I think some of the old school methods were really taught to be this blank slate and you are perfect and you have no issues and let it be all about the client. And I've found from being on both sides, client and therapist, that seeing your therapist as a human who has a real life with real, ups and downs is really human and relatable.
I can completely relate to that too, because I think when I started in this field after 9/11, the analytic work was so common at the time where you really had no information about your therapist. And I remember even just when I had my first daughter, that there was so much processing that was going around it because they could physically see the changes that were happening in my life. But now with so many mental health clinicians being on social media, and there's so much more of our lives that are shared within the public, I think that approach that you're talking about, Alana, of more an ADP approach of really having more transparency about what you've gone through is so helpful for your clients, because that relatability allows them to feel like they're not the only ones, but also the fact of just not, life isn't just about surviving, but they can get to the other side. But that humanness that you talk about, I think, is so important for them to understand that we have to embody the work. And when we're not embodying the work, that leads to burnout. And we've seen that with rates of upwards 75% post-pandemic. The World Health Organization has claimed that. So the most important is for us to really embody our practice and do it every day. And then having that transparency that we're human and we're going to make errors and have a bad body day or have a trigger from our trauma, but we're still in the process of always healing and working towards that. And that's really what leads to a more joyful life.
I think that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Susan. Yeah, because you're absolutely right that if you're not showing your weaknesses, you're really not doing the work, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the beauty of the social media therapy also, is that people can really see different sides of you. They can see a glimpse of your day, or I like to kind of record stuff for myself after sessions when things come up. I'm like, oh, this is really relevant, or, oh, this is going to be great to share with everyone else. And so it's a little bit of a real time kind of glimpse into just everyday challenges that we all come up with or come up against.
Yeah, that's so true. I think you can use social media either as a way to show the glossy side of yourselves, or what you're talking about. You kind of just show the real moments and the vulnerability. So it's wonderful. Before we move to our next question, there was just a question in the chat about what was that percentage of burnout again? So maybe Susan, you want to repeat that in the context?
Sure. So the World Health Organization claims that currently there's 75% of clinicians that are struggling with burnout. And I know that I've spoken to organizations that they've sort of talking about the need to get more clinicians, because clearly now we're in a mental health crisis, and more people than ever are really understanding the importance of getting support and therapy, but there's not enough clinicians. And so during the pandemic, we talked about the medical community and the burnout rates of that, but we also didn't talk about the mental health clinicians that were supporting the medical community, and also people that were dealing with trauma, which every single person on the entire planet has experienced a trauma now after the pandemic. So this is more important than ever as clinicians for us to really understand we can't just teach, we have to embody self-care. We have to embody our practices, and we also have to understand when we need breaks and take that, because otherwise we're going to really be even more of a mess without enough clinicians for what the need really is at this time.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that statistic. So now I think it would be a good time to, if we can, if the tech works, we have a little poll for the audience about how often do you compare yourself to your colleagues? And oh, yay, the poll showed up. So if you want to fill that out, It's either often, sometimes, rarely, or never. Kind of fun to see how these come in.
I was excited to vote and realized I can't.
Okay, okay.
Sitting with
What,
you all that are so amazing. Yes.
Ilana, what would you have voted?
I would have
where
put
would-
sometimes, a few times a week.
Okay, nice. Well, it also looks like that is the not the majority, but what's that word? Plurality of the audience, like 50. Oh, now majority, 50% sometimes, 30% often, 20% rarely. And I'm sure that rarely, there's probably a lot of evolution there. So maybe some of our more experienced therapists. So I guess the segue is into our next question about imposter syndrome. I think when we had our pre-meeting for the session, some of you talked about how early in your career as therapists, you sometimes felt imposter syndrome and the pressure to be this perfect therapist, which I think Alyssa was mentioning early on, is sometimes even reinforced by things that we see in pop culture. So what tools have you used to help yourself feel more confident as a therapist and in your abilities? Maybe Alana, could I ask you to go first?
Yeah, I love the topic of imposter syndrome. I actually have done a lot of, talks on it. And the most helpful thing I think for me has been the acceptance and just acceptance of the fact that it will show up in our lives. It's not something that we want to get rid of. It's similar to anxiety. It's not a bad thing unless we label it as bad or frame it in that light. And so I think perspective has a lot of power here, and recognizing, having awareness and acceptance that imposter syndrome will come up in our lives. I know for me personally, when I first got licensed, it was massive. I was, I was having nightmares that I'm going to have my license taken away, that I didn't actually pass my licensing test. The actual proof and evidence of having passed wasn't enough. My mind was making up stories. And so really mindfulness, acceptance, and looking at it more as a cognitive distortion, flawed thinking, rather than overly identifying with I am an imposter, really kind of separating it out, deconstructing it. I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome has shown up in my life in this moment, and kind of looking at the impact rather than overly identify and having it be like I am an imposter. Having a conversation, a dialogue, looking at it same as anxiety. It's trying to teach me something. A part of my brain, the alert is going off, the alarm is going off, and I'm trying to seek protection in some way. So what are strengths and tools and different perspectives that I can kind of shift and play with, different dialogue, internal resourcing, just really throwing all your skills and tools at it so that you feel a little more empowered to interact with it, rather than having it just be this, well, I'm an imposter, I should just give up, defeat.
Oh, I love that. I've read a lot about imposter syndrome, but never you're right, that connotation that imposter syndrome is bad, rather than it's just something that we all experience. I like that reframe. Thank you. Susan, did you want to chime in?
Sure. I think for me, I can completely relate to what Alana is speaking about. And I'm sure Alyssa can relate as well. During my training, it was after 9/11, and I was working as a rape crisis counselor in the ER on call. I was working with EMTs and EMSs and first responders. And then soon after was Sandy Hook, when school shootings started to happen. So I was totally thrown in, feeling like I was the biggest imposter. And for me, it wasn't just enough to be like, I'm an imposter. I felt like if I did something wrong, I was actually going to harm someone, given the catastrophic events and natural disasters that we were sort of dealing with at the time. So for me, the biggest resource, which I've carried throughout my entire career and continue, and what you guys will all learn about me, is I'm extremely community focused and always having mentors that have walked the walk before me. Still to this day, I am regular contact with women that are in their 80s and 90s, have been doing this work forever, that I will call and ask and help ground me to know that I'm just going to be okay, that it's not about doing something, it's about sitting with someone and being present. And that kind of feeling like I have a team and a support when our job is so individual has really changed my entire perspective. And I'm always trying to kind of create more community and reach out and connect with people. And that I think really kind of helps me to keep it in check that I'm not alone.
That's wonderful. So there's this concept of having almost elders who have been there before. If I could ask, not to put you on the spot, but do you remember any specific conversations with someone about any sort of imposter syndrome you were feeling and maybe what they said?
Sure. I have a mentor that she's in her 80s now, probably one of the best trauma therapists I've ever worked with. And she said, always doing less is more. And the fact is, we started talking a lot about humanness from the beginning. The fact of just really even sitting with someone and being able to sit in their pain with them, that is actually so transformative because it allows them to kind of work through their process. And if it does feel too big, you can put it in a container, an imaginary container. You can seal it and say toxic, don't open until ready, and allowing that to sit and know that you can hold that with them versus someone to feel like they're in alone and getting triggered and they can't function in their life given what they've gone through. So I think that was always stop working so hard. If I'm working harder than my patients or my clients, I'm not helping them. I'm actually needing to actually show that I'm somehow helpful. And that's about my needs. That's not about them.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah, speaking as a non-therapist here, we have plenty of people in our lives who are busy. It's that therapeutic space. I mean, what you all offer is someone who is grounded and present and fully listening to us. And I think that's really what you're talking about, Susan, is making sure you can still bring that capacity. So I think we have another poll here. Do you take your clients' lack of progress personally? There we go. It's coming up. And it seems like, so just in case people in the recording can't see the options are yes, often, I try not to, but it happens, and not often. And it seems like the overwhelming number of people in the audience say, I try not to, but it happens. So this next question is, as a therapist, how do you manage working with clients who struggle with perfectionism and who may be judging you by the same standards as you're working with them? I think Susan, did you want to chime in on this one?
Sure. And I'd love to hear from you guys too, how you deal with this, because it's always a question that I love to hear from other therapists of how they work with their clients with this, because I think it comes up a lot. And especially that we know the markers of what perfection, oftentimes is sort of connected with high anxiety, that this tends to come up for us a lot. And so for me, it really is an opportunity to deepen the work and to get into what I'm very interested and passionate about is heartfulness, and sort of kind of emptying those 85% of negative thoughts that come up where there's a lot of judgment and transference onto me based on what they're really judging in themselves at that time, and being able to kind of really sit with some tools and skills to kind of shift that space. And so really even just heart focused breathing, which is shifting our emotions and our energy into more positive renewing feelings and emotion, or kind of really allowing them to sort of recognize the awareness of how sticky that judgment can sort of be. And it's really based on fear of the unknown, of what happens if I change. So if I am transferring this onto you, then you get to hold it, or then I don't have to change. And if we really start to kind of sit with that fear part of it and allow to kind of settle down to get more heart focused, I often find that time that judgment really shifts. But Alyssa, I'd love to hear from you what you do within your practice when you're working with clients that the perfectionism comes up that gets transferred on you.
For me, I really help the clients create the awareness around it. And we work towards identifying what the core belief is that the perfectionism is stemming from, and also helping them see that the perfectionism is this false sense of control and what is it really that they are trying to control. So for me, it's bridging that gap between the action and the insightful awareness. And I agree with you. It's like it's holding space for them when they transfer it on to you, so that they don't have to change, and helping them see that with just a lot of compassion.
That's always the key, right? Is compassion. How about you, Alana? How about what comes up for you and what do you usually do with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, self-compassion is a huge part of it. I am always really curious about meaning. So what's underneath the perfectionism? If I'm perfect, then what? Filling in the blank. What are you trying to really achieve? What's the deeper desire of perfectionism? I think a lot of times it's a fear of rejection because we're such relational beings. It's our survival of being accepted by others, essentially. And so is perfection trying to get me to be lovable or acceptable or desirable or successful or good enough, really deepening the dialogue and moving away from the focus on perfection and seeing what else is in there. Where is there one little thing where we can hook into and explore and find some sort of resource or compassion?
I love that too, because we all are human beings where our two fundamental needs are always wanting to feel like we belong and we're loved. So that gets triggered all the time too. So just normalizing that is so powerful.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Are there any other cognitive distortions that come up with perfectionism that you often deal with either clients or yourself as a therapist? Like any cognitive distortions that come up related to your work?
I think the biggest ones that I see are the black and white thinking, right? If I don't do this well, then that means this about me, which like also ties into the labeling, where you pour your worth into the outcome of something. So if something doesn't go well, you personalize, you take it very, very personal, and you dismiss the process of something because you're so focused on having it turn out a certain way. So it's this thinking that something cannot lie in the gray. It either has to be perfect or it's nothing at all.
Mm, mm. And often there's a lot in between.
Mhm. And it's the should and must statements, right? Like, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. Like when I was talking about the documentary and I saw somebody else in the comments related to it, and I saw that the therapist gave their clients note cards. I was like, I should be doing that. I should be doing this. I should be saying this. It's a lot of this rigidity in how we feel like we're supposed to be. When the reality is we can lie anywhere on that spectrum, and it's all okay.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Alyssa. Susan or Alana, any cognitive distortions? Other ones? I know you mentioned a few already.
I think they all fit, honestly. I think there's the filtering of just focusing only on where I'm not perfect and not seeing any of the other good in your life. I think there's the overgeneralization of if I'm not perfect, then I'm not a good partner, I'm not a good sister, I'm not a good, just like it blows into this huge narrative, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing. I really think every single cognitive distortion is applicable to perfectionism. And sometimes that could be a really great way to work with clients also, is seeing what is the concept of perfectionism, what's the narrative, what is the cognitive distortion that's showing up most in their life. And then there's a great path of finding alternate narratives or just working with that one particular cognitive distortion, which then has that ripple effect of softening. I really think, what Alyssa was saying about rigidity, that's definitely a telltale sign of perfectionism. And so the opposite of that, aiming for softness or flexibility, whether it's with behaviors or thinking or beliefs, can be a really good path to go down.
I love that too, because I think that you're giving a tool to really recognize where the stickiness is, and then not saying, because oftentimes all of those things can be happening. But if you start to kind of identify a few of the key ones, and then what is the movement towards that? So maybe it's more towards ease or not taking responsibility for everything or asking for help. that you don't have to be responsible to do everything yourself because no one else can do it. And therefore you have to be perfect all the time, and making those small steps. And that's such an important therapeutic tool to help people feel that these are small micro steps that they can kind of really create change that has these massive ripple effects throughout their life. I love that. These are such great examples.
And I think it also opens up the other topic of, I've heard clients say, well, that's not enough. Me focusing on my black and white thinking is not enough to change. And so there's another microcosm of perfectionism showing up. And so the dialogue can just go round and round until something kind of clicks.
Absolutely. And those small changes are the ones that actually have the biggest ripple too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, and Susan, you touched on something around, therapists not asking for help. I work with hundreds of therapists in my job, and I feel like most of them tend to be helpers themselves. But that means they don't ask other people for help. So I think that's a really great point.
I think that's the hardest thing in our job because we're just naturally like that. But that's also a trauma we have to understand, a trauma coping skill that we learned at a young age, that we have to be the helper. Therefore, our needs are met, that we feel important, special, loved, fill in the blank, right? And so the need to actually be in community and that we're not have to doing everything on our own is so important for us to have the awareness that you're not really helping people unless you're actually embodying the work and actually being in your highest potential too, as well.
Wonderful. And I think one of the things with these cognitive distortions is just, it's one thing to know them, and it's another thing to be aware of them and notice them when they come up for you. So my next question is more around that. How do you notice perfectionism in yourself? How do you become aware? Maybe Alyssa, if you have some thoughts on that.
I want to start off, oftentimes when we talk about perfectionism, we don't talk about the 3 different types of perfectionism that exist. And there's self-perfectionism, which I think we're focused on today. It's having these unrealistic and rigid expectations for yourself. Then there's other prescribed perfectionism, where you have these very high expectations for people around you. And then there's the socially prescribed perfectionism, where you believe society or somebody outside of you has very high expectations of you, and you feel that you need to be perfect in order to gain approval. And so we want to recognize if we have any of this within ourselves by first asking ourselves, what are the expectations that I have of myself? What are the expectations I have of others? And what do I think other people expect from me? And whatever your answers are, then you want to go back and process, is that realistic? Is it reasonable? Is it flexible? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it rigid? When I think of these expectations, does it make me feel anxious? Does it make me feel nervous? Does it make me feel small? Does it make me feel like I can't ever meet it? Or does it make me feel motivated? And does it make me feel excited? So you kind of just want to ask yourself, what are these expectations and how do these expectations make me feel? If the expectations make you feel really anxious and shut down, then that could be a sign that the expectations are unrealistic. If the expectations make you feel motivated and excited, then that's a sign that it might not be a sign of perfectionism. It might just be a sign of healthy goal setting.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that distinction. Do you find it ever blurs the line between is this anxiety? Is this too much anxiety?
How much is too much? Sometimes, yeah, it can. It absolutely can.
Yeah, wonderful. And so the 3 levels again, I thought that was really, so it's self, others, and what society.
Society. Mm-hmm.
So what's an example of the society perfectionism?
Let's say you grew up in a home where your parents were really rigid, really strict. You have to have straight A's and come home with X, Y, and Z. And then maybe you grow up as an adult that feels like in order for me to be loved and accepted by those around me, I have to perform a certain way. So it's feeling like you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for the approval of others because you feel like others expect that from you. And that could have stemmed from earlier childhood experiences. I think society also perpetuates it.
Got it. Well, that hits home for me personally because I come from an Asian household and people are always asking about my parents. They're like, were your parents these tiger parents? I'm like, no. But I did still feel a pressure to get straight A's. And I think that maybe
It could
it's
be
more
cultural too, right? If
right.
all your friends are in AP classes and doing X, Y, and Z, it's like, okay, I got to too.
Yeah, totally. Love that.
I think it can also show up as resentment in maybe a relationship. So I feel like I'm holding myself to a certain standard and my partner isn't meeting me in the same way, or my friends aren't meeting me in the same way. And so that can be kind of the other focused as well, is having expectations of other people based on your own pressures and perfectionistic viewpoint.
And I also think that that healthy striving that Alyssa mentioned too, when it goes awry, we can kind of see that come up as like procrastination, that it kind of holds that line a little bit where you are kind of in sort of that healthy striving, but then it sort of teeters over to that perfectionism when the other or yourself or the society kind of feel those pressures coming in. And then even if you have those goals or those actions that you want to take, the anxiety kind of rises, and then you get stuck in a loop of procrastinating of the steps that you need to go forward. So that's always a really good sign to kind of look out for too.
Okay. Is there anything you ever procrastinate on as a therapist, Susan?
I procrastinate writing every day. So writing is, I'm like, oh, the perfect time. I know Alyssa writes a lot too. So, sometimes trying to set that up and then there's 15 other things you have to do before. So trying to be really protective of that time because you really need the space to kind of drop down and get into that creative loop. So that is really that is really where I procrastinate and worry about what I'm writing sometimes because it's a harder skill for me than other things.
Got it. Love that. Well, I see a question in the chat that's wondering if you could please explain other-oriented perfectionism a little bit more. So maybe if I could throw it back to Alyssa on that.
Other is when you have, and Alona actually just explained it, but it is that you have high expectations for those around you. So it's what you just said, where if you have high expectations for yourself or you hold yourself to a certain standard, you expect your partner or your friends to do the same thing. And you feel that other people, like a clear example is my friends should always be there for me when I need them. I'm always there for them when they need me. They need to always be there when I need them. My partner should always know what I need when I'm upset. So you have these very high, and when they don't know what you need, you get really irrationally upset with them because you have these very high expectations of how things should be. So it's more of like you have high expectations for the people around you. You're very hard on the people around you.
Got it.
And I
And
think
that really highlights the cognitive distortion too. My friends should always be there for me because I'm always there for them. The black and white, rigid, no gray area.
And I think we've got to be as therapists careful too, because sometimes perfectionism can look like on that spectrum of personality disorders too. And so, making sure we're kind of understanding what's really going on here versus kind of jumping to the conclusion, because it can look like other features as well.
Yeah, and on that point, Susan, how do we kind of differentiate between striving for excellence and perfectionism? Both generally, I guess, with your clients, but also with yourself as a therapist?
Well, I think that what we are all sort of talking about really right now is just that overdrive that starts to happen when it gets to be unhealthy. And that need to really be aware of that, of, am I burning myself out? Am I getting too close that I'm not kind of feeling like empathetic or in my life where I'm present, that I'm always flipping from like past to future. If I do this in the future, therefore, or if I'm not doing this, then I'm not doing enough. And I think that the perfectionism never feels enough. It never stops. There's no dopamine that you get in your brain and you get all those feel good chemicals because it's always something else that you have to do. It's never ending. That cycle just keeps going around and around and around, and it's exhausting. And that really leads to burnout, or for people to feel depleted or stop wanting to do the work, or giving up on their goals, or giving up on the community, or whatever it may be, because that drive just gets an overdrive, needing to kind of fill those not enoughness or unlovable or whatever kind of cognitive distortions that sort of have happened early on with, most likely during their childhood, for some childhood trauma, or just, something in their life that kind of created those sort of narratives for them of not enough. So, but how about with you, Alyssa, in your practice, what do you see coming up, or what comes up for you with the same question?
I think just recognizing the difference between healthy striving and perfectionism, it is not tying your worth to any specific outcome. Because again, with perfectionism, it is, if something goes really well, you feel really inflated by it. And if something doesn't go well, you feel like you yourself are a failure. And with healthy striving, it's paying attention to the nuggets of learning along the way and seeing those things as wins, regardless of what the outcome is that you're trying to do. It's practicing that non-attachment to that outcome, because you're just so excited about what you're doing and what you're learning and who you're meeting along the way, that I think that's how we differentiate healthy striving and what healthy striving is.
It's the process, right? Falling in love with the process versus the outcome.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that non-attachment to outcomes. And I think along the lines with that, I always look for a sense of expansion rather than contraction, whether that's in your thinking or your willingness or the behaviors. And also, is it a dialogue versus a monologue in the client's mind? Is it just, shoulds and musts, and this is the way it is? Or is there the awareness of that and then a response from a wise mind, or the more flexible mind? So having that little bit of parts work instead of just this one track, rigid, constricted sense of thinking, beliefs, behavior, all of that.
I love that. And I wonder if there's something we could learn from at least how we view pets or small kids, and at least the way I observe them versus the way I observe myself. Like when you're talking about expansion or contraction, I'm just like, it's just a joy to see my new dog kind of interact with the world. And I don't have these rigid expectations for him, but for myself, it's like goals at the top of the calendar with a checklist of 10 things, and if I don't achieve those things, that's what I'm putting my worth on.
There's a great a little exercise to do with that too, that I find so helpful. And it's something that I even do for myself often. If you have a picture of yourself when you're 5 or 6, and just kind of having that around, so you start to see the child within you, and making sure that play and having compassion and kindness for yourself too, because you are that little child, or you are those little people that you see, that you just love and awe of, wonder of their lives, that you get to see through their lives, their eyes. But just to making sure that you're sort of connected with that too as well within yourself.
Thank you. I like that. I will have to print out that picture and put it on my desk. Thanks, Susan. All right. So I guess I'm curious about what's the role of acceptance in overcoming perfectionism. Alana, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I love, if I don't say the word acceptance at least, 20 times a day, there's something wrong. It's such a big part of just my own belief system, the way I, do my own work, the way I work with clients. I think it's similar to what Alyssa was saying too. It's like non-attachment. I think of it as the open palm. Instead of clinging to something, it's like, I'm accepting. There's a huge distinction between acceptance and approval or liking. I can accept something I don't like. I can accept something I don't really prefer, but I'm not fighting the reality. It's just utter surrender and presence and mindfulness and witnessing, rather than this fight against or defiance. It's again the softening rather than the rigidity, whether it's in your thinking, your body sensations, your belief system. It's presence and witnessing of what is, and then from there processing, having a dialogue, looking for action steps if there is a desire to create change, but you're really not fighting against the present moment reality.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, we have a few more questions that we'd love to discuss and topics, but I do also want to put in a plug in for people who are joining us live to put in your questions. We'd love to have the panelists respond. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom there if you have any questions for the panelists. But I think let's maybe touch on, just some concrete skills and tools. What can a therapist use, some helpful skills to overcome perfectionism in your work? And this question is for all of you, so please chime in.
I always like to use science. So I think just continuing what Alana was speaking about, is that the more my clients can understand that we're human beings having human experiences, and that our brains are going to do what our brains do, and our hearts are going to do what they do, and our nervous system, I think that it helps to normalize sort of what's happening. And so, for instance, just understanding that the only way we learn is through error. That's the only way that we develop neuroplasticity. And so kind of having that kind of thought in mind is so important for our clients to kind of start to shift. And with that, I really use a tool which is kind of untraditional, I guess, but humor. And the fact is that we have to laugh at ourselves. And when we make errors, and even maybe it seems inappropriate, but we're working with eating disorder clients, oftentimes I'll say, okay, so you got an A+ in eating disorder. Let's work on another coping skill, because we've got that one covered. Let's start to work on some more neural networks of healthier ways to sort of cope with this sort of perfectionism or this need that's kind of coming up for you. And really kind of finding the humor in the things that are not funny, because so much of the work that we're doing is painful and it's hard. And having that, we know in times of distress, research really shows that that's when we build the most resilience, if we can find some humor in it. So I've sometimes had like biggest belly laughs in the hardest, most painful times with people, because it really kind of breaks up that rigidity that we're talking about, or that black and white, or I'm never going to get out of this, or, I have to do this in order for me to be loved or liked, or fill in the blank. So that's something that I really love to use in my practice, and something that I try to embody in my life.
I love that. And I think even kind of encouraging people to, okay, so you're really stuck on perfectionism. Let's perfect, mindfulness. Let's perfect self-regulation. Let's perfect your breathing techniques, the things that they're really in resistance of using specific coping skills. A lot of my clients resist mindfulness or journaling or identifying and labeling your thoughts and your feelings, dropping into the body. I try to shift perfectionism and frame it more as practice, but like, okay, let's perfect practicing healthier coping skills. And again, the different parts work is like, perfectionism can live over here. Let's also give attention to wisdom and encouragement and compassion and present moment awareness. Let's not give all the attention to perfectionism, especially when we break it down and realize that it's creating paralysis, or it's creating the opposite of what you're really desiring. We have to wake up to the reality again, the awareness of what is the cost of perfectionism in your life. What are you actually striving toward? And just kind of playing with a lot of my work is based in narrative and meaning making and conversation with different parts of yourself, and strengths-based internal resourcing. So just kind of bringing all of that to the table.
I am a big fan of paying attention to our own internal dialogue and holding space for the duality. So within our career, if we find ourselves comparing ourselves to other people, instead and shifting that language from like, why aren't I like them? It's being able to say, something I practice personally is like, what I'm doing today is enough. I am enough as I am today, and there's still room to learn more. So I'm just a big fan of shifting the stories we tell ourselves. If those stories are not helpful, if those stories are embedded in trauma, if those stories are embedded in limiting beliefs, it's being able to hold space for that duality that exists within us.
Thank
That's
you.
so cool too, because we're wired for story. That's just who we are as human beings. So, you can cognitively understand something to be true and then still tell a different story and have a different outcome within your body too, right? So I love that.
And it's part of our healing. In order to heal, we have to talk, process, make new meaning, shift perspective, talk about things differently, you know? So yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those very concrete tools and tips that people can take away. I don't see any additional questions in the chat at the moment, but if people in the audience have them, please feel free to chime in. We do have a couple other topics we could explore. We actually have one poll. Do you feel like you constantly have to get more training as a therapist? So let's see people's answer to this poll.
I'll verbally answer that one again as heck yes.
The long list of all the ones that you want to do, right?
Oh yeah, there's a running list.
And I think, I think to expand on this question, I think it depends on where it's coming from. Do you want to get more training because you're excited about it and there's so much more to learn? Or do you want to get more training because you feel like it's never enough? Where you're at is never enough. So I think the yeses can be interpreted in two different ways.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I also think that, I have a kind of a rule because when I started, my perfectionism was like, I just was trying to learn anything in order because I felt like I was such an imposter at the beginning of my career. And so I think for me, I was lucky enough to be in a 3-year trauma studies program where I had a taste a little of everything: IFS, EMDR, you know, uh, SE, SM, you name it. We kind of had a little taste of everything. And then I was able to just sort of decide what I wanted to kind of go in deeper. But in the beginning, I felt like I was very shallow with my learning. And now if I'm going to do something, I have to actually say, hey, if this is a click initially, then I'm going to go in deep and I'm going to really be able to use it, have it be applicable versus just have a bunch of stuff that I've been trained in, which doesn't really have any practical use because I haven't actually really done the work myself and I haven't really embodied the work. So that's kind of a line that I hold for myself, that I don't get carried away with this perfectionism. And, I have to say no, even if another training comes up that I'm like, oh, that would be so great. Or a friend tells me about something. I'm like, no, right now for the next year or 2 years or 6 months or 5 years, this is the work that I'm doing now. And that's really helped me kind of get much deeper into particular modalities that I'm really passionate about. How about you, Melissa? Have you had the same experience or has it been different for you?
No, I agree. Because there's always going to be a new thing that comes out, a new study, a new intervention. And there's always going to be something, but we're not always going to have the time. And so I think it's important that we ask ourselves, what is it that I'm really passionate about learning? And then just moving forward with it confidently. And then just what is the boundary? Where am I going to draw the boundary just in terms of all of the different things I'm willing to learn, I want to learn? Because there's, something I've learned because I get the little ads in the mail all the time. It's like, I can do this. I can do this. This person's doing this. Why aren't I doing this? It's like, wait, what do I want to do? Not what do I think other people would be impressed by, but what do I want to learn about?
And I think it's also to the community, bringing it back to where we kind of started. And, Alana, I know can attest to this so much too, but just the fact is that feeling like the community is right and it's supportive to us and that we're actually growing, because oftentimes we don't even have to do the work. You can get a consultation from someone who's an expert and you can kind of learn pieces from them and get a taste of that way or get the support that you need. But each of these modalities have different communities that are going to speak to us differently. And what are you investing in and who are you investing in, I think is really important. How about you, Alana? Are there certain communities that you feel kind of more connected to, or?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think the beauty is that we're in such a helping profession. I mean, even looking at this, webinar being provided for anyone who wanted to sign up, I think there's so much information out there, whether it's in mentorship or webinars or programs. And so for me, knowing that information is out there will always be out there. I don't have to get the certification, or, I have so many cataloged programs that I've purchased throughout the years that are unfinished, and being okay with the fact that I can go back to it and take one nugget of wisdom away from it. I don't have to be the expert in IFS. I can just learn one concept that is applicable to this particular client, and that is helpful in and of itself. So the ease of just knowing there's so much out there and it's accessible, it doesn't have to all be within me. And it is such a community career to be a part of this field, and we're here for one another. And there's so many factors, personality, interests, hobbies, it's limitless. So just finding that for that particular client or this particular instance, this is who I need to support me or to help me out or point me in the right direction. I think for me, it's the most fulfilling thing, because I'm eternally curious. And so just the endless information is comforting in a way.
And the amount of learning that you can do in this field, which is so exciting. Are you constantly growing and evolving to new areas or interests? And that's also based on just your life. It's going to evolve and change too.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that keys up nicely just one final question I have. What's one nugget of wisdom that you're going to take away from today's session? Just maybe something someone else on the panel said, or something that you shared that you kind of experienced in a new way.
I think I'm taking away just even being here with all three of you of how profound that is for me, and just the nuggets of wisdom that I'm going to take with that, and that experience of the energetics that I've kind of existed with here. It just feels so amazing for me. And I'm going to take away that positive, renewing feeling and emotion. I'm going to hold on to it about being able to spend time with all of you, and know that there's always these resources too when I need them to kind of tap into, which feels really important.
Yeah. I'm taking away gratitude for everyone who showed up and participating and witnessing this conversation, because I think is just so lovely to support one another and to have this human experience. I feel so validated and connected to hear these professionals that I look up to so much saying, what's going on in my mind, and having this relatable experience of perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And it's just really helpful and kind of comforting to hear that I'm not alone in this, and no one here is alone in this.
I'm taking away that word acceptance, right? I know it, but today you reminded me of it, Alana, that word acceptance, that imposter syndrome it's going to come up for us, and it is what it is. It's information. It doesn't define us. And I did see a question in the Q&A. I just want to briefly touch on it. Somebody said, what advice do you have for somebody who's new in the field and they struggle with imposter syndrome? And this is just a reminder to us all who struggle with perfectionism, that the research has shown time and time again that what is most important in this work is our relationship with the client. It's not the modality we're using. I mean, that helps, but it's our relationship with the client that's the catalyst for change. So that's what I want to say to the person who asked that.
It's the Therapeutic Alliance. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that reminder. Well, I know we've come up on the end of our hour here, so I just wanted to end with a little bit of gratitude for everyone who took this time to come and attend and to give your energy in the chat and your questions. Thank you for taking some time for your own self-care. And thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Susan, Alana, Alyssa, for spending this hour sharing your wisdom and all the prep and the work that went into it. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate all of the therapists in our network at Path Mental Health, and really hope that this is helpful in some way for anyone who attended.
Thank you.
Thank you guys
Thank you so much.
so much.
Thank
This is
you.
amazing.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.